Andy B here. We have gate crashed upon Dan Rouse's Pure Brunch. So sorry, Dan. He sent me a message while I was having a cup of tea a moment ago saying he's sulking, which I think is unfair because we're at the Evangelical Alliance offices here in London. Myself and Nathan Thomas down for the day. Now, between 10 and 11, checking my watch, I spoke to Rachel Heffer. I've got some more guests and we are here live on the radio until 1 p.m. And in front of me, I'm going to get the names right. I have Katherine and Jo before me. Hello, Katherine.
Hello.
And hello to you, Jo.
Nice to be here.
Right, now, Jo, you're in luck because my wife's name is Jo. Therefore, there's a good chance I'll get your name right. Katherine, I'm really sorry in advance.
It's all good.
That's all I can say. It's my caveat of, I'm so sorry. So we are here at the EA offices talking about all sorts of stuff. Now, Rachel's opened the conversation on the Finding Jesus. I know Talking Jesus was other research, but let's start with you, Katherine. What is it you do here, first of all, at the Evangelical Alliance here in London?
Yeah, so my job title is the Being Human Engagement Lead, which probably leads you thinking, what does that mean? What does she do? All things around the question, what does it mean to be human? And I'll let Jo share more about that because it's her baby as a project. But I look into the question of what does it mean to be human? And I'm particularly interested in the emerging generation, so young adults. I also head up our graduate scheme here at the EA and involved in all sorts of different hot topic issues like the area of sexuality. So lots of different things, but very involved in anything young adults.
Let me just go on to the young adults thing because my wife and I've had this conversation many times. What is a young adult? Because you've got children and then you've got young adults, you've got teenagers and you've got adults, and somewhere the lines kind of blend and merge. So in my head, you see, you've got children, then you've got teenagers, and you've got adults from 18. Which a lot of teenagers don't like, but I always argue is correct. And my wife says, well, it's not necessarily quite that simple. So what is it? What are young people for you?
Well, it's actually a very controversial question. So I don't know if I want to necessarily say this is definitely it, because some of the older people will get upset that they're not in the young adults, or some of the slightly mid-aged 20s will be upset that they are still called a young adult. So you end up offending everyone if you sort of label it. I think it's a stage of life. If anyone wants to call themselves a young adult, I will work with them and engage in the work they're doing. I'm 29. I would still say I'm a young adult.
I'm really chuffed. I got married at 19 and my wife and I joined the National Trust, and my absolute joy is my wife joined as an adult because she's quite a few years older than I, and I was a child.
Wow.
Joined the National Trust as a married man. Absolutely loved it. And the person that was there said, this is so exciting. They said, I'm actually got a child and an adult and you're married, according to the National Trust. Wow. That hence the conversation we've had over the years. It may have changed by now, but it's just one of my joys. I managed to join as a child. Which
Congratulations.
I love. Thank you. Look, you have to have these moments in your life which you can look to and think, I did that. Go me. Right, Jo, just give us more overview. What is it you're doing here at EA then?
So I am Director of Communications and Engagement here at the EA. So I oversee our communications work, our membership, our mission work, and I co-lead the Being Human project, which Katherine is a part of. Okay,
well, let's just unpack a bit of the Being Human project, because I think for some people, I think this actually could be quite controversial in all sorts of ways. So just unpack for us simply, what is Being Human about from your perspective in terms of the project you're doing here with EA?
So what does it mean to be human is probably the most fundamental question any of us ever ask. And we're asking that question in loads of different forms, or exploring our own answers of that question in loads of different forms every day. So depending on what age you are when you get married, whether you're a child, a young adult, an adult, or over the hill, whether you are politically inclined, what sporting team you align to, all of these things form and shape our understanding of humanity. We are immersed in stories. Those stories help tell us who we are and how we should live. And we exhibit habits. We do things that portray what we think is good, what we think is right, what we think will help us, what we think might harm us. There's loads of different elements to what it means to be human. But ultimately, we think that being human the heart of it, the truth of it, and the fulfillment of it is found in Jesus. So the Being Human project helps us explore some of the cultural conversations, the stories and the habits that are shaping us in our world, how the God story gives us a fuller, truer, most beautiful picture of what it means to be human. And ultimately, we want to invite everybody to find out what it means to be human in Jesus.
One of the things that I have said, especially with the two big parliamentary bills that were voted on last week, and this is something I've said for a long time, but I always make a point of saying I believe that every one of us is made on purpose and with purpose. Because I think for some folk, they can think, well, what's my point? What's the point in life? Which I think we all go through at some point. Where do I fit in? I chat with someone who does sensory health, and she's always talking about knowing where you fit in. Not in terms of be squashed, but what is my place? What is around me is what she's talking about. And do I know, is there a door behind me or a wall? So, physical space, and is it warm or cold? So it's understanding where we are in a time and space. But in terms of being human, and the bills last week, I've been saying this more and more. You are made absolutely deliberately by God, on purpose and with purpose. And the bit I love to also put in is that God spoke the world into being, but he handmade you. And I love that bit.
Yeah, beautiful.
Being human, it is, like you say, it's critical, it's fundamental, it's foundation. Who we are, the fact we're speaking right now. So how did you start doing being human? Where was the sort of desire to do that, and why did we think that's good to look at?
That's probably my question, isn't it? So the Being Human project was birthed by my colleague Peter Linus and I, and we were finding a number of different conversations were occupying our time. We were having conversations similar to the ones that we've been having politically over the last couple of weeks, which came to a head last week with the two bills that came through. So for your listeners, we had the decriminalisation bill, which means that a woman can now have an abortion up to birth with no criminality attached to it. And then the assisted dying or assisted suicide bill passed its second reading in the House of Commons and has now gone on to the Lords. So it looks like assisted dying, euthanasia, assisted suicide is going to become law. So those two big bills were being debated in Parliament, but we've had those sort of conversations for different things over the years. And the problem was that in order to be able to answer why does a Christian have an issue with these laws that are coming through, what does a Christian think, why is there a difference of opinion within Christianity about these laws and about what they mean, is because actually we don't have a very good answer of what does it mean to be human, made with and for a purpose, for example. And so there isn't that agreed understanding of what we're talking about, what a good life looks like, what does it mean to be made in the image of God, which means that when these bills and these ideas and these conversations bubble up, we're all just making it up on the spot and we're reacting to the thing that's come up. It also means that we don't know how to have a conversation with our friends, our neighbours, our colleagues, our family, about what the Christian faith has to say in these conversations. I've had amazing conversations with my non-Christian friends over these bills coming through about what does life mean? What does quality of life mean? Is there something essential about being alive that is specific to the human condition? And where does that idea come from? So to be able to share Jesus, to be able to invite people into life in all its fullness, we were finding that was fundamental before we could have some of these hot button topic conversations. So Peter and I started chatting. We started pulling some of the cultural stories and analysing them from a theological perspective. We started the Being Human podcast. And then sadly, at some point, I got told I had to write a book. So Peter and I wrote the book Being Human: A New Lens for Our Cultural Conversations that came out from Hodder in 23, available on all good bookshops. And then we've been building the team to have those cultural conversations, but also those missional conversations around sharing Jesus and inviting people to find a good, true, beautiful life in him. So that's the kind of lay of the land.
I love that bit, a good and beautiful life in him. I know that for many of us, it's like, where does God fit into our life? That's a question that we all ask, whether we perhaps even know that or not consciously. It comes up. Yeah. How does God fit into my world? How do I fit into God's world? And I love the bit in the Lord's Prayer, God's kingdom on earth. Well, that's us, people. We are bringing God's kingdom on earth.
Amen.
Or we should be. Which is why, chatting to Rachel from 10 to 11, just some of the research into how people are coming to faith here in the UK and why, which is such an important answer, which takes a lot of time. So I can appreciate to some degree the 300 people that were asked and then the 20 deeper study, which is great. But it is important to know how we fit and where we fit in life, because we want to know, don't we? Come back to you then, Katherine. In terms of engaging with people, how do you engage with young people about the message of Christ, about the fact that they do matter in a world that perhaps might lean towards, well, you sort of matter, but actually more interested in what you can do for us rather than in the fact that God loves you?
Oh, that's such a good question. And that was what intrigued me about the Being Human project to start with. Because I was listening to the podcast, listening to Jo and Peter talk about all these issues, and I was having the same conversations with my non-Christian friends and thinking through how do we help Christians have a framework for how we talk about these issues? Because our friends who don't know Jesus are asking us these big questions, and who's actually helping and providing a language for how to talk about Jesus through the stuff of life. And it was through listening to the Being Human podcast that I was like, these guys are doing it. That's great. I want to work for them. So that was great. Yay! But I think that's my starting place. I know from talking to friends and neighbours and people that I bump into who don't know Jesus, they have big questions. There's a huge amount of spiritual openness at the moment in the world, and that has increased. And we've seen that from different reports and research over the past months. It's great to have the stories, but also to have the stats. And I know even a few months ago, I was sat down with my sister, who's not a Christian, and her boyfriend as well, who's not a Christian. And he said, Katherine, I've been trying fasting recently, and yeah, I'm convinced it must be spiritual, because when I fast, I just realise how selfish I am, how not able I am to control any of my desires. There has to be something spiritual in this. Do you as Christians fast? I said, well, yeah, it's a Christian practice, actually, fasting. Let's talk through what it looks like in my life and actually how that helps me connect with God. He's like, that's so interesting. And his reflection was, I'm experimenting with all of these ancient things because the modern way of living isn't working. It hasn't given me or my parents what it promised. I'm not experiencing the happiness and the freedom that it says that no boundaries and just do whatever, make it up for yourself, live an individual life is promising. There has to be an ancient way. There has to be an ancient pathway to follow that will provide me with something else. And I'm like, I think that's a great starting place for a conversation about Jesus. And I think that conversation in lots of different ways is being replicated all over the place. And at Being Human, we are trying to tell that good news story of there is this story that your story is planted within. There is a huge framework that your life can sit securely within. And then there's practices. There are things that you can do that are good for you. There are practices like fasting, like silence, like Sabbath, like being part of a church community, like prayer, that you can give a go as a way to explore faith. So those are some of the threads that we're pulling on at the moment. But when it comes to young adults, that's where I'd start. It's what's the question? What's the longing? Where is there a lack of fulfillment or anxiety? And then what are they trying out? Because it seems like everyone's trying out some sort of spiritual practice, whether it be meditation or whatever. And then how do you use that to point them to Jesus? And time again, I've just had incredible conversations because of that.
When I was at school, I was really fortunate. My secondary school was a Church of England secondary school. And I was really blessed to have that because it was great to be in an environment where not everybody was a Christian. However, there was very much a Christ-centered everything to what we did. The church in Wolverhampton had 4 little chapels. The 4th one was in our school. So it was lovely to have that connection beyond the 4 walls of the school, kind of with the church. But I remember I got into trouble with the chaplain a few times because I just wanted to get on with being a Christian. And I was one of a few, I think I have to be honest. So when I went past the little rail thing to put in a plug for a keyboard so I could lead worship one time, you can't go beyond there, that's sanctified ground. Yeah, great, but that's the only plug. Well, you're not allowed there. She walked out, so I went past and plugged it in. So I'm getting on with it. We're having a Christian union. And I remember some of the stuff that happened there, but it was so encouraging having conversations. There was one lad which I remember, which is why I wanted to share this, because he said, I'm an atheist. I have no religion and there is no God. And I remember thinking, wow, you're the closest to Christ right now of all the people, because you know something about who you are in the world. I think you're wrong. And we had some, conversations, shall we say, as young people can. And I did Christian theology A-level, so even more debates with Methodists and Muslims, and I was a Christian who was not denomination, and all the wonderful things that happen when you get, into teenage years. But I remember some of the conversations with this guy, because I thought, you are so close to Jesus Christ because you're rejecting him so strongly, which tells me you're really seeking and searching him. And all your arguments and all your clever words, it ain't working, because I know that you're seeking Christ. Do you think that hunger is growing amongst the people that you are, each of you, meeting in your own circles? I mean, I sort of know the answer, but I'm curious to know what your thought is on that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think your comment around people being against God, being close to God, is so true. I know that was true in my own life. I would have arguments with Christians all the time, but actually I was really searching for God and asking big questions. And then, it took 7 years from that point of the first argument with a Christian to then give my life to Jesus. And I'm so grateful for the faithful prayer of many suffering Christians in my life. But I'm definitely noticing a temperature change in the spiritual atmosphere, and in conversations with people in my local church. We've had people show up who have just seen a reel online, scrolling on Instagram, TikTok, and have given their lives to Jesus by themselves, and then wandered into church and said, look, I've been a Christian for a few weeks. What do I do? Well, all right, how did you become a Christian? Oh, I found this YouTuber, I saw this, I watched this podcast. Oh, right, okay. So you've literally never met any Christians apart from online ones. Yeah. Oh, right, okay, that's quite different to where it was. My husband often talks about being at uni and how, he was a laughing stock for being a Christian. Whereas now I talk to the students in my church and it's like, oh no, everyone believes that there could be something. It's quite interesting that you're a Christian. It's not seen as stupid anymore. It's very plausible, actually, to call yourself a Christian. Are you noticing that as well, Jo, with your peers?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's, I think more and more we're hearing those stories of the shift, like you were saying, that John at uni was the laughing stock, and now it's curious, and it's not curious as a, like, you're a curiosity, you're really weird, tell me why you're weird, but you're really interesting. And not a British interesting. So I think there is a shift. There's this paraphrase of a verse in Hebrews which says how hard it is to persuade the indifferent mind. And I think for a number of us who have been Christians for years, we have faced an indifferent society and culture where you do you. If that makes you happy, that's fine. But the sane ones over here, we're just cracking on living life. That has shifted, I think. And we are hearing more and more that story of shift, that people are not indifferent to the Christian faith or the Christian practice anymore. They are openly curious and interested that their world is not working. And so something is shifting and pulling people forward. I know that I was getting annoyed because I was hearing other people have these stories and I wasn't seeing it in my church. And the stats were clearly showing that there was growth and there was openness and that people really were coming to faith. And I was like, but all I'm hearing are these stories secondhand. I'm not hearing them for myself. So I got stroppy and I prayed. And I was like, God, I really want to see this in my church. I really want to see this for myself. And the next week we were saying hello to the people next to us, that awful bit in the middle where you have to say hello to somebody while they set up for the sermon. Turned to the guy behind us, asked him if he'd been to church before or if he was new or where he'd come from. And he was like, oh no, it's my first time in church. ChatGPT told me to come. And we're like, okay, sure. He'd been listening to Jordan Peterson. He'd then gone on a rabbit warren of YouTube videos, asked ChatGPT where he should go to church. And AI had recommended ours. Brilliant. Next week, I hear about a woman who'd been coming to church for about 5 months because she'd had a dream of Jesus and she wanted to know who this Jesus was. And as everyone else is stacking the chairs at the end of the service, she asked my pastor, what must I do to be saved? He actually got the question. And so surrounded by stacks of chairs, he prayed with her. She gave her life to Jesus. Wow. 2 weeks later, she was baptized. And then 15-year-old lad was invited to our youth group by his mate. He walked in and he said, instead of wanting to just sit on my own in my bedroom, just playing on my computer or playing on my Xbox, I found a community of people who I would never have ever said hello to, but who remembered my name, wanted to know if I was okay, and made me feel at home. This Jesus is amazing and I want to give my life to him. And he and his mate are now inviting all of their friends, all these 15-year-old lads coming into church every Sunday, because that's where community is and that's where life is. I stopped getting stroppy. Because God had opened my eyes to help me notice this quiet revival that if I hadn't just been paying a little bit more attention to, I could easily have missed those stories. I wouldn't have noticed that it was happening even in my own church. But God is doing something, but I think some of us are missing it, or some of us aren't noticing it, or some of us aren't necessarily hearing those stories for ourselves. And if that's you, I just encourage you to pray, because I really do think those stories are happening everywhere. We just need to pay attention.
Let's just touch a little bit on your faith journeys. I know you're sort of hinting at pieces of it, but I mean, let's just stick with you, Jo, just for now. What was your faith journey? How did you find yourself moving from this God that's kind of interesting to now Jesus is my mate? What was the story for you?
So I grew up in a nominally Christian home. My mum was a Methodist, so she took me to Sunday school because that's how you raise your kids. You take your kids to Sunday school and they'll get good values. But that was it. There was no living faith there, but there was a kind of Christianese background. My home life wasn't the happiest, and there was a lot of problems at home. And a friend of mine at school when I was a teenager invited me to a church Christian conference that was being held in my hometown. And she was like, at the end of the day, it just gives you a week out of the house, doesn't it? And I was like, sign me up. So I found myself connected a little bit like that lad in the youth group with people who were kind to me and people who were friendly. So I stuck around a church community for a while in my teenage years and bounced around different churches and different youth groups, but it wasn't something that had really taken hold in my heart and in my life. Anyway, fast forward, I'm at university, I'm 19, I'm still floating around those Christians from that conference. It's an organisation called Share Jesus International. My husband now runs it. That's another story. So I was floating around the Share Jesus guys. And on a week of evangelism and mission, which I was incidentally leading, one of the preachers came up and prophesied over me. Wow. And he said, you have an amazing relationship with God, or rather God has an amazing relationship with you. He wants to know you. He wants to call you home. He knows where you've come from. This guy knew so much about my history. And it was a real Damascus moment. In an instant, I was changed. I was crying. I was laughing. My heart shifted. And the transformation between me the day before and the day after was night and day. And really, I've never looked back. I've given my life to Jesus. He has never let me down. I have let him down plenty of times, but he is faithful and his love endures. So,
isn't he always?
Yeah.
I have one question before I come to you, Katherine. When you were given the prophecy, was it given 3 times in a row? Because I was on Pace Project as it was, and there was this guy that came to give prophecies over all of us, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. Honestly, blew my head. Yeah. What God can do when you put yourself, and he went round, I don't know, 30 people or something, and everybody's prophecy was How do you know about my life?
Yeah.
Came to me and said it 3 times. And my wife now says, you weren't listening, were you? You weren't listening then either. Because you said it 3 times. And it wasn't going. I was like, why are you talking to me like that? What's that about?
Yeah.
But actually, as I sort of reflected, it was quite powerful for me. But it was funny going around the room, the detail, like you say, of some of those people are saying, how did he know my life?
Yeah.
How? Well, that's God. But I mean, you ask the question, you kind of know the answer because it's a Christian environment. But even then you say, but how? Yeah. How does God do that? But that's what God does.
I think for me, God was absolutely chasing me down. So I was on this week away, surrounded by young adult Christians, and their lives were a mess. I mean, we had mental health challenges, we had eating disorders, we had relationship traumas, we had absolutely everything in this group of young adults. And I was so jealous of them. Every single one of them had something I didn't, because every single one of them had a relationship with Jesus. Yeah. And so I'd gone out the night before and I had prayed and I said, God, if you are real, I want to know you and I want a relationship with you. So when this guy comes up to me and starts using that language at me, the relationship with God that God wants to have with me, I just broke down. And what was interesting in that moment was it wasn't one of those sessions. In fact, there had been a prophecy given in one of those sessions. And I was like, oh, I think that might be me. So I legged it to the car park to have a cigarette and avoid God completely. And instead, actually, he chased me down and he stopped me and he collared me and God just grabbed me. I had very little say in the matter because God was ready for me to come home, and home I came.
Beautiful, honestly. I love how God, but he chases each of us down because he loves us so dearly. Katherine, what's your story of faith?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how many people have that if you're real God prayer moment, because that was definitely a part of my story as well. And when you chat, I'm sure you've chatted to loads of people and that's part of their story. And it's quite interesting. Sometimes I'll just encourage students, if you don't know God, why don't you just pray like, God, if you're real? But for me, I was raised in a totally atheist home, atheist in the sense of how atheists describe themselves nowadays, which is they're not really atheists. There's all sorts of spiritual things, but they don't believe in God and Jesus. So my parents very much had massive superstitions, like if you walk under a ladder, you're cursed. I broke a mirror when I was 14 and they were like, well, that's the next 7 years of your life ruined. Or like blackbirds or crows or whatever, if you don't say hi to them in the right order, then it's like, there we go, day's done. So there was all sorts of spirituality things floating around, but I'd never been to church and hadn't heard anything about Jesus or read the Bible. And as a teenager, I had lots of big questions about life and had bumped into a few Christians and had sort of had some debates around some of the like hot topic issues and some of the stuff in my life that I felt like, Christians will hate me because of this or whatever. But that was the only way that I'd engaged in faith. And then I got to drama school and I'd sort of worked my whole life for this drama school moment. I'd got in, it's a huge thing. I was like, this is my life now. And it wasn't as great as I thought it would be. Actually, it was really tough. And I thought, wow, everyone's really good at this. And it's a bad environment. Like, it's not that fun. And this is what I've worked my whole life towards. So I'd started to have these existential, like, is this all there is to life? And then when I was 19, I got a phone call that changed my life forever. And it was a friend from back home. And they said, I'm really sorry, Katherine, but Stefan's died. And Stefan was one of my best friends and he'd been sick, but it was a very rapid illness. He had a brain tumour. And within the course of 2 months, so diagnosis, he then passed away. But what was interesting about Stefan is that he was a Christian. And I would say not like a super great Christian. He hadn't really shared his faith with me, hadn't really told me anything about Jesus, hadn't really looked to do that. But he was a really good friend, which was good. And in his dying moment, it was the best witness to me, because when I spoke to his mum and I just said, I don't know why I feel like I need to say this to you, but I just feel so guilty. I feel like I've been an awful friend, an awful person. I should have been more present. I should have been there. She just said, Katherine, stop. I just want to tell you what Stefan's last moments were like before he died. He was completely at peace. And you know what he said before he died? He said, "Mum, I wish you could see what I'm seeing right now, and I wish you could come with me." She said, "What Stefan would want is for you just to look into that." And I was like, okay, I will. I need to figure out whether what he saw and the peace that he had is possible for my life, because I'm terrified of death. I'm terrified of dying. And this is the closest I've felt to death, because I've now had a young friend die and face that. And that could happen to me. Why not? If it's a surprise for him, it could be a surprise for me. And the thought of that terrified me. But he was at peace. So I started Googling, what happens after you die? What do Christians think? Is there life beyond the grave? Christians, all these things. I don't know what websites popped up, but it was enough to make me think, you know what? I think the Christian God could be real. I think Jesus might be real. And if he is real, I'm going to pray to him. So I had my moment similar to Jo, which was the God, if you're real. And I prayed for what I wanted most at that time, which was joy. I had just felt so sad. So I was really depressed. God, if you're real, just give me a break in this grief, in this sadness. I want to feel joy. I want to experience life. And I prayed waiting for a train. And I felt this rush of joy. I stepped onto the train laughing, and everyone was looking at me, and I was just giggling to myself, like, I just feel great. This is so funny. My life is a mess, but I don't know why. Is God real? I think God might be real. Did God just answer my prayer? And then I spent the whole train journey just arguing with myself, like, no, you made it up. You just made it's because you said that, then you felt this. But you've been trying to make yourself feel happy this whole time, Katherine. You couldn't just make this up. Yeah, I know, but I probably did make it up, right? But what if God really is real and he has met you? So I was having this wrestle, and a while after that, I was in one of my lectures at drama school. I was in a hip hop class, actually, which was hugely embarrassing. I should never do hip hop. I don't know why I signed up to that class. So I was in a vulnerable place, and I just finished embarrassing myself hip hopping. And this girl came up to me who I'd decided I didn't like purely for the fact that her name was also Katherine, and she was very smiley. And at the time, I wasn't smiley at all. And I was very competitive. So I was like, oh, Katherine, everyone's going to look at that Katherine instead of me, which says a lot about my character and sin at the time. And I really did need saving. And anyway, she came up to me and she said, you're going to think I'm really strange. I don't know whether you're a Christian or not, but this morning I was praying and I asked God who I should invite to church with me this weekend. And your face popped into my mind. I know we've never spoken before, but do you want to come to church with me? And I was like, what? I've just prayed this and God, and now this is wild. And I was super emotional, obviously, and went along to this church. It was a tiny church plant, and I experienced so much healing, developed such a relationship with Jesus, and just had my whole life turned upside down. And the pastors were great. They just said, you've been a Christian for 2 weeks. Go and tell people what God's done in your life. You're 2 weeks older than anyone who doesn't know Jesus. So go out, you're an evangelist. 2 weeks into knowing Jesus. So that was sort of my entry into faith. It was go and tell people about him now. And I did. And I saw people come to faith, and it was amazing. I thought, this is normal Christianity, that we just see salvation all the time. And I've realised it's not so normal. But that was my entry into faith.
I was running an 18 plus group years ago, and we were just having conversations about God. There were students and younger adults who weren't married, and there's this sort of collection, quite a large group. And we were just having a conversation. I couldn't tell you what it was about now. I've no doubt. Probably about, I don't know, it's really boring. And this lad just has been coming for weeks. He just pipes him in the corner. I want what you guys have got. I want to become a Christian. And we were so thrown. None of us knew what to do. We were praying for people to come to Christ and come to faith and see Jesus in us. And then somebody sitting there and said, I want to become a Christian. And we were absolutely dumbstruck with, what do we do now? What's the next step? As much as you wanted it, suddenly it strikes us. And I think you're right. It can be the norm, and it can be the norm for a season where I suppose the joy of God just sort of infuses the people around us and they want what we have. But that one was not expected as much as you wanted it, which is why we need to be ready.
Definitely.
Being human, just coming back to that, what is it that you enjoy about how that can help people, I suppose, engage with the people in their sphere of influence, for want of a better phrase?
I think being human gives people a wonderful framework for evangelistic conversations that don't necessarily feel like the crowbarring in Jesus. It's this is how you view all of life through the lens of the God story. And of course, the most natural thing is to talk about all of life through that lens. And then your non-Christian friends will see that and see that actually the story and the way that you view the world is so much more beautiful and good, and hopefully ultimately they'll see it's true than the story that they're trying to patch together. So I think it's a very helpful framework for engaging people in those types of conversations.
Yeah, we talk about there's a lens we use, so deliberately suggesting that the way you view the world around you, you can look through a lens and notice things because they come into focus. And so we talk about the 4 aspects of humanity are significance, that we each matter, that a human life has value and worth and significance because we're made in the image of God, and he knows us and he loves us and he wants us to know him too. So we matter. We look at the idea of connection. We matter to each other. How we relate to the world and each other around us matters. When we get it right, it's beautiful. When we get it wrong, it's catastrophic. So we are connected in some way. To be human is to relate to each other. We matter to each other. To be human is to be present. So our physical body, our time and our space, the world that we inhabit, is absolutely fundamental to being human. Jesus is God incarnate. He came in a body, in a place, in a time, because that's what it is to be human. That was what God needed to do in order to enter into humanity. So our presence in a dislocated, disconnected, digital world, to be human is to be present to each other. And then finally, participation. You said purpose. We have a purpose and we're for a purpose. So we look at the idea of purpose, freedom and power, these things that all connect us with humanity. Every single person, whether you have a different faith, you have no faith, whether you're of the Christian faith, we all find resonance in those 4 truths. But the lens that the God story affords us shows us where that significance comes from, how we connect to each other, what it means to be present in the world, and where our power, freedom, and purpose can originate and come from, and what it is for. So there are bridge building moments all the way through being human that allow us to talk about it with our mates.
People who are listening thinking, well, I don't know, I'm not the sort of person that can talk to other people, or my story's really boring, so what can I possibly do? How can I possibly add value to someone's life? I mean, either one of you can answer, but how would you encourage someone just to, I suppose, how would you help someone to get out of their own way to be who they are, who God made them to be, on purpose, with purpose, to help another person in their life?
Well, firstly, I would say there is absolutely nothing boring about having a relationship with Jesus. That's like the most exciting thing ever. Amen. And so if you know Jesus, that's incredible. And that is a story to tell people that don't know Jesus, because that will be interesting to them, because it's unusual. We are not in the majority. So it will be an interesting and intriguing and thought-provoking thing. I think often people that have been raised in total Christian homes, gave their life to Jesus at 5 and then continued, think, oh, I've got the boring story. No, you've got the most incredible story. You've known Jesus for that amount of time. Like, I wish that I'd known Jesus since I was 5. Like, so much in my life would have been a lot easier if I had known him. So what an incredible story, and what a witness to the people around you. So I'd encourage people in that. And then also, there is so much in the world and in the news and in the stories that are swirling around that people are engaging with and asking questions around, that you're engaging with naturally anyway, and differently as a Christian. And so it's thinking through, how do you create conversations intentionally where you're able to share how you view this Christianly, without saying, well, as a Christian, this is how I view this, but just in your normal, natural conversations. It's whenever I'm looking at the news, or whenever I'm watching something, I'm thinking, and how would I talk to my friend that doesn't know Jesus about this? Like, if they're saying, oh, if you watch this, I want to have processed, the lens in which I'm viewing this through, and then some of the stories that this is pulling at, so then I can unpack how to actually engage with people on this.
Yeah, brilliant. I think different temperaments will approach a conversation about Jesus and with Jesus with their mates in different ways. So it could be as simple as I love the phrase of gossiping the gospel. So when you're chatting with my mum friends and we're despairing of our kids, I will gossip the gospel in those moments. I was praying for my daughter this week and just feeling really despondent, and God just really helped me have some hope and gave me some strategies and and they're looking at me as if to go, sorry, you what? God did what? And all of a sudden I opened up a practice that was internal, and I made it visible because I was just talking about it. It didn't need to be big. It didn't need to be scary. It was very normal because that is my normal practice. And so my friends hear me talk about my faith all the time. When it came to the assisted dying conversation, one of my friends is terminally ill with cancer at the moment and is delighted that this law is being passed. Not necessarily because she wants to exercise her right in this law coming through, but because she says she just simply wants to know that she's got the choice, that there is a moment of choice before her. And so we were having a conversation, and I was like, I really get that. You want to feel in control. You want to feel like you have some power in the most powerless situation that you have in this moment. I really get that. But actually, from my perspective, there's a justice question here about actually what does our ability to choose in this moment rob other people of life, or how does abuse come into this place? What does consent look like when you're scared and when you're afraid and the world and your life seems to be changing? How do we protect and how do we steward? How do we legislate in that space? Because I think life is precious in all forms. Yeah. And I get very nervous about saying quality of life comes in. When does somebody lack quality enough that their life is simply not worth living? And how do you legislate for that? So all of a sudden we're having a really interesting conversation around justice versus choice, which are some of the cultural stories that we're having. So if you look at the gospel as not being something that you sing about and talk about for 2 hours at church on a Sunday, but if you actually look at the God story as being the frame of reference for your entire life, how do you not talk about Jesus with your mates? Because he is involved in every aspect of your life with your mates. Yeah. And he has something to say in each of those conversations. It's
absolutely true. I was hearing from a lady who was speaking in a church many years ago, and she had, I'm sure it was a really severe version of MS. And for part of her struggle was as a Christian saying, well, I'm praying, why am I not healed? That was a struggle. It wasn't the biggest struggle. The biggest struggle that she said was the fact that she needs to have others help her. And then she said, I realized that the fact I have to have people help me means there are people who are helping me who have to spend time with, who I can talk to. And so she saw the condition of MS not as this ending thing, but a beginning opportunity to talk to all these carers that would come through. And it was phenomenal to hear how she switched this in her brain from this is terrible, this is like a really bad diagnosis, to I get to spend precious time with people who have to listen to me. And she didn't, abuse that one, but she used it as an opportunity. And I just thought, what a beautiful lady of God that she's this terrible diagnosis that nobody wants, but then she saw how God could use that for his glory and the people that she met. And I just think that I just needed to share that. I don't know why. Maybe someone's listening. That's relevant. But she was just stunning in her words of, do you know what, that terminal diagnosis could be the beginning of someone else's life. And it was just that. Just blows my mind, and especially with relation to the extension of abortion. up to birth, and then we've got the assisted suicide bill. I'm going to say thank you to you because we need to get back to the news, but thank you, Jo and Katherine. I could sit and talk to you an awful lot longer, but we need to go to the news. So thank you. We are here, just by the way, at the Evangelical Alliance office in London, and it's been great so far, and we're here till 1 o'clock, so don't go away. Here's the news. The July issue of Pure Media, the magazine, comes out on Friday the 4th of July. With a plethora of amazing writers speaking about life, hope, money, technology and more. In our July edition, we take a focus on Matt McKay and his band Meet Your Maker, as well as shining a light on John Cox and so much more. The digital version is always freely available online. But did you know you can also enjoy the convenience of a printed subscription too? For all of this and more, just head over to www.puremediathemagazine.com. www.puremediathemagazine.com.